And people online can see the text?
Yes, Bhante.
Okay, good. And then this we can. Okay, so let us begin then with the salutation. Just one time, I'll do it. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the fully enlightened one. Homage to the worthy one, the fully enlightened. Homage to the blessed one, the worthy one, the fully enlightened one.
Magnify this. Make this bigger so that they can see it.
Make it bigger, okay.
Right.
Okay, we could try boosting a little bit. Okay, the size is okay. Okay, so we dealt with, we're in the section of the Mangala Sutta dealing with we call this the virtues of character as well as the steps for developing wisdom. So these are verses, I think it's verses 8 and 9, and I'm taking first the virtues of character from 8 and 9, and then we'll take separately the steps for developing wisdom. And so far we've dealt with two of these virtues of character, reverence and humility, the qualities that sort of open you to receiving the teaching and making progress in one's practice of the path. And now we come to another virtue of character, and this is called contentment. And the Pali word is santuti. And usually this is formulated in relation to the monastic life. And so here I took a passage that we have what they call the four supports, the four requisites of the monastic life. There's the robe, the alms food, a dwelling place, and then medicines and other kind of support for the sick. Of course, now the list of requisites is expanded in the modern era, so every monk needs a computer, a cell phone, various other things, certainly a clock of some kind. But basically the ideal is whatever you have, to be content with the simple way of life. And so here the Buddha praises that the monk is content with any kind of robe, no matter what the color is. Of course, it should be within the appropriate range, from a kind of dark orange to sometimes even brown. In the Tibetan tradition, it's more a kind of burgundy color or maroon color. And then if you don't get the kind of robe, of course you need a robe, but if you don't get the kind of robe that you want, you don't become agitated, and if you get it, then you use it without being attached to it. And then the same thing applies to alms food. If it's very luxurious, very delicious, sumptuous, varied foods, again, you simply use it as nutriment to sustain the body. If you get very coarse, simple food, as long as there's a healthy balance, you remain content with it. Any kind of lodging could be a very simple hut. Ideally, it should be a simple lodging, nothing too luxurious. But then the fourth here, instead of mentioning medicine, this passage mentions, so we have the three kinds of contentment, and then the fourth virtue here is finding delight in meditation and delight in abandoning defilements. And when one has that delight, one doesn't extol oneself or disparage others because of that. And then I took a passage that's relevant to household life, which speaks about the bliss of blamelessness. And here the Buddha is speaking to Anathapindika, the philanthropist, and he says that there are 4 kinds of happiness to be achieved by a layperson, depending on the circumstances: the happiness of ownership, the happiness of enjoyment, the happiness of freedom from debt, and the happiness of blamelessness. So the happiness of ownership, so somebody, he's working at right livelihood, so working with energy, and he acquires wealth righteously gained. So he can think, I have acquired wealth by energetic striving, it's righteously gained, and when it can experience happiness and joy in this. This is called the happiness of ownership. And so for the layperson, the Buddha doesn't sort of disparage the acquisition of wealth. He doesn't say something like it's easier for, how does the saying go? Easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go into heaven. No, he'll say a person can be wealthy like Anathapindika, but you'll see they use the wealth in the appropriate way. They have to, of course, support their own family, their own household, but also use the wealth to do good deeds, meritorious deeds. Okay, so you acquire the wealth by energetic striving through right livelihood, and you can rejoice in obtaining that wealth. And then you have the happiness of enjoyment with the wealth that you acquire by energetic striving. You enjoy the wealth, but you do meritorious deeds. You support various philanthropies. Of course, you have to support your family. You can hold parties for your friends and then give gifts to them, and also give to worthy charities and to support renunciants and to support temples, monasteries, dharma centers. And so you think that so when you reflect that you're enjoying your wealth and doing meritorious deeds, then you can experience happiness and joy. And then when you are, the third type of happiness is the happiness of freedom from debt. And so when you're able to clear all of your debts, both large or small, then you think, I have no debts to anyone, whether large or small, and you experience happiness and joy. But then comes the 4th type of happiness of the household life that the Buddha speaks of. This is the happiness of blamelessness. So the householder behaves blamelessly by way of body, speech, and mind, and then thinks, I am endowed with blameless bodily, verbal, and mental conduct, and one experiences happiness and joy. So that's the happiness of blamelessness. I think if I remember, I think I cut off, maybe I didn't include the last portion of this sutta, where the Buddha says of these 4 kinds of happiness, the best kind of happiness is the happiness of blamelessness. Yeah, I should have included that. And then there was another passage I had earlier. When dealing with right livelihood. Yeah, maybe this is also a relevant passage. Okay, so the Buddha says that based on the Himalayas, the king of mountains, there are a kind of large tree, gigantic tree called the sal tree. They grow in 5 ways, and he mentions in branches and so on, in bark and shoots, in softwood and in hardwood. So based on the Himalayas, the king of mountains, great sal trees grow in these 5 ways. And so, again, this is the old patrician ideal of the family. When the head of the family is endowed with faith, the people who depend on him grow in 5 ways. They grow in faith, they grow in virtuous behavior, in sila, in learning, in generosity, and in wisdom. Yeah, but what I wanted was Yeah, was the passage. That the householder earns the wealth righteously and then uses that wealth without being tied to it, infatuated with it, and blindly absorbed in it, seeing the danger. The danger is the attachment to that wealth and the kind of obsessive, or the obsession with accumulating more and more wealth, and then understanding the escape from it. The escape is not being attached to the wealth and using it in beneficial purposes. Like now in our country here, the United States, we have these multi-millionaires and billionaires, but you could divide them into different types according to their disposition. We have people, okay, like Bill Gates, and who is the other one? Warren Buffett, yeah. So they are multimillionaires, billionaires, but they establish funds for providing philanthropic aid to people in poorer countries, health measures, supplying them with agricultural training and agricultural development. We might not always agree with the way they go about it. They go about it with a very corporate-oriented mindset, but still they want to use their vast accumulations of wealth for beneficial purposes to benefit the world. And then on the other hand, you have these billionaires. I don't know about Jeff Bezos. I don't know about what his orientation is, but Elon Musk, who just uses that wealth in such destructive ways, absolutely just completely reprehensible. And who is the other one? Oh, the one who's the example of the beneficial use of wealth would be Jeff Bezos' former wife. When they divorced, he gave her billions of dollars, and then she set up philanthropic funds to use that wealth. I think she, in her will, she has relinquished like maybe 2/3 or 75% of her wealth for charitable purposes. So that's a very, very beneficial use. And even Taylor Swift, the great star, the mothership of the earth now. Yeah, no, yeah. She uses her wealth, she gives like millions and millions for beneficial purposes, for charitable purposes. Though I have a little grudge against her. Of course, New Year's of this year, I sent her through her email contact an email address telling her about my organization, Buddhist Global Relief. And didn't get a reply. But she was I think she was on the world tour, so maybe once she comes back and settles down, I'll try again. Okay, so contentment. And then the next one is gratitude. And there's not so much said in the text about gratitude, but there are a few passages which are very pithy. And I took one of them, that there are these two kinds of people who are rare in the world. What are the two? One who takes the initiative in helping others, and one who is grateful and thankful. And so that is considered to be a rare type of person, and it sort of underscores the need to be grateful and thankful. And we'll see as tomorrow, as we come to the end of the retreat, we'll do a little meditation on gratitude. And my own teacher in Sri Lanka, the German monk Venerable Nyanaponika, he used to do this as a kind of meditation on gratitude. He would think back to his parents. He came from Germany, from Jewish family in Germany, and they left Germany, or he left Germany when the Nazis were rising to power, he knew that he had become a Buddhist when he was 17 years of age. This would be something like 1918 in Germany. And he knew when the Nazis were coming to power, his father had died in the 1920s, so he left Germany 1936 and came to Sri Lanka with the intention of ordaining as a monk, but he brought his mother and some other family members to Austria, thinking Austria would be a safe place from the Nazis. But then when the Nazis came into Austria, then he arranged to bring his mother and the other relatives from Austria to Sri Lanka. At that time, it was a British colony called Ceylon. And the other relatives went on to Australia, but his mother stayed on in Sri Lanka, or Ceylon. And she, though coming from, a German Jewish family, but under the influence of her son, she became a Buddhist and lived the rest of her life it was all in Ceylon. It only became Sri Lanka in 1972. So anyway, he would do this sort of reflective meditation of gratitude to his parents, especially his mother, who sort of understood his urge to become a monk and gave him permission. Then he would reflect on his teacher, who was the first monk from continental Europe, the Venerable Nyanatiloka, and reflect on all of his Dhamma friends over the years who had passed away, with thoughts of gratitude toward them, and then gratitude towards the lay people who were supporting him at the hermitage where he lived. And I think he would have been also reflecting on gratitude towards me, because I was the young monk taking care of him up to the time of his passing. Okay, so anyway, this is gratitude. So we have now contentment, gratitude, and this is an important quality to be cultivated. And tomorrow we'll use some lines of reflection to how to develop gratitude. And I'm going to come back to the factors concerned with developing wisdom later. First, we want to finish the virtues of character. So the next is patience. And there's a lot said in the text about anger and patience. So here we have 5 dangers in anger: that one becomes displeasing and disagreeable to many people. One gets many enemies, has many faults. One dies confused. Another one, not mentioned here but elsewhere, is that when you habitually become angry, it changes the features of your face so that you get these rather aggressive lines in the face. And you give off sort of what they call bad vibrations. So other people just see you and immediately they think you're a disagreeable person. And then if one is habitually angry, you might die confused. And then with the breakup of the body after death, one can be reborn in one of the bad destinations. And then the benefits of patience: one is pleasing and agreeable to many people. So this would be a person who's patient, and especially with loving kindness. And one doesn't have many enemies, or more positively, you attract people, so you get friends, win many friends, and you don't have many faults. And one dies, can pass away unconfused with a clear mind, and through patience and loving kindness, with the breakup of the body after death, one will be reborn in a good destination, even in the heavenly world. And then the text mentioned various methods of removing anger when you have resentment towards somebody or anger against somebody, various methods of removing that anger. So one is developing loving kindness towards that specific person towards whom one has resentment or anger. Okay, so you develop loving kindness towards that person, so you bring that person to mind, you make them the object of your loving kindness, and just keep on directing the thought, may that person be well, may that person be happy, may they be safe, may they be free from their anger and hostility. Another method is to develop compassion for the person. So if you see that that person is aggressive, mean, cruel, irritable, hostile, and then you could realize that that person is creating a lot of drawbacks for themselves, a lot of trouble and afflictions for themselves. They are living with a lot of inner turmoil or affliction. They're causing conflicts with the people around them, that they're losing their friends, and that way you develop compassion for that person. And then the third method is simply, if you find it difficult to develop loving kindness or compassion, you just develop equanimity towards that person, not paying attention to them. Actually, I don't see so much of a difference between developing equanimity and disregarding the person that you resent and paying no attention to that person. To me, they just seem like different ways, two ways of saying the same thing. And then the fifth way mentioned here is that you apply the idea of the ownership of karma to the person you resent. So this is where you reflect that this is especially when that person is kind of explosive, violent, cruel type of person. You reflect that this person is creating unwholesome karma for themselves, and you've tried your best to change their ways, but nothing is working. So you just reflect that this person has to receive the results of their karma. And if you keep calm and patient and maintain your metta, your loving kindness towards that person, you are creating, at least for yourself, wholesome karma that will be beneficial to yourself. Okay, this is actually a very good passage on patience. So the Buddha is saying that others may speak to you in various ways. This is especially when the case when their speech is untimely, when it's rough, when it's hateful, and so on. In such cases, you should train thus. Our minds will remain undisturbed, and we won't respond by speaking bad words in return, but we shall dwell compassionate towards that person, compassionate, wishing for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. And so you start off with that person, the aggressive, hostile person. You develop loving kindness towards them, and then you spread the loving kindness until it pervades the whole world. And the Buddha says that this is with a mind like the earth. The earth can't be disturbed. If you strike the earth, dig the earth doesn't bring forth any hostility or ill will. And then he comes to the end of this teaching. Well, this is a bit difficult, but he says, even if bandits were to start carving you up limb by limb with a two-handled saw, one who gives rise to a mind of hate towards them would not be carrying out my teaching. Okay, so there's a little bit more, but when you get this file, you can read the other text. But now I want to come to the next quality, which is being easy to correct. So this is called, the Pali word is suvachasata, which is based, it's derived from su, which means good, and vacha. Vacha is speech. And sometimes this is mistranslated as being of pleasant speech, but actually it means being willing to accept advice and correction from others. And this becomes a very important factor in the monastic life, because in the monastic life, people have to live together in a group, and you don't get the impression that a sort of idealistic impression of monastic life where everybody is living together in perfect harmony, in peaceful, calm relations, doing everything together without any friction or conflict. But that friction or conflict takes place, and particularly there can be monastics we have these inveterate troublemakers who refuse to follow the instructions, refuse to follow guidance. And so the Buddha emphasizes the importance of this quality of being easy to correct. So if a monastic is misbehaving, it becomes the sort of duty of the senior, especially the senior monks who are well grounded in the discipline and the management of a monastery, to correct that junior monk, or sometimes even a senior monk, who's not behaving properly. And so here the Buddha speaks about, he starts off with the opposite, the qualities that make one difficult to correct. And so a monk might say, let the other monks correct me, I want to be corrected by you, but he might have qualities that make him difficult to correct. So that is, he becomes impatient and doesn't take instructions rightly. And so these are some of the qualities that make one difficult to correct, that one has evil desires, especially the desire for power, position, fame, respect and esteem from the lay community. And so one might have to be corrected. But if one is sort of obsessed by that kind of desire, then one becomes difficult to correct. Then another, the monk praises himself and disparages others. He gets angry easily. He becomes resentful because of the anger. He's stubborn. He's contemptuous and insolent, and so on, obstinate and arrogant. Some of these seem a little redundant. And then this is really an important one, because this is a problem that I mentioned the other day that I had in my early days as a monk. One adheres to your own view, you adhere to your own views, you hold to them tenaciously. I am right, you are wrong, even if you're disproved logically by reasoning, if you're reprimanded, still you hold to your views thinking, I'm right, the others are wrong, and you refuse to relinquish your opinions, your ideas, and that makes a person difficult to correct. And the opposite are the qualities that make one easy to correct. So one is not dominated by evil desires, you don't praise yourself and disparage others, you're not easily overcome by anger, you don't get resentful, you're not stubborn, and so on. And if you get into a discussion with somebody about differing opinions, different views, if you see that your views are wrong, you're ready to relinquish them easily. You don't stick to them stubbornly. Okay, maybe at this point we could take some questions and I want to make sure that I get the people online as well. And so again, the way to ask questions here is to raise your physical hand, and the way to ask questions online is to use the hand symbol. Okay, so I see, is that Andrew? Is that your name? Andy or Andrew? Yeah.
Oh, thanks so much. I have been wondering about the role of forgiveness in Buddhism.
Yeah.
And as we're talking about Majjhima Nikaya 21 and this, ultimately the Saw simile, but it seemed like generating this idea of equanimity, metta, and compassion towards one who angers you is really the equivalent of forgiveness, isn't it?
Okay. Not quite. Okay. There is definitely the idea of forgiveness in Buddhism, but this is not a kind of pleading with the deity for forgiveness for one's sins, but okay, with it, and it enters into the context of monastic life. And so if a monk commits say there's a dispute between two monks, and those things take place, a quarrel, and one monk acts aggressively and improperly in relation to the other, and then his faults are pointed out and he comes to recognize the fault, then there's a process where he'll sort of bow down, if he's a junior monk, bow down to the senior monk and say, I recognize my transgression, please forgive me for any faults I might have committed. And then the senior monk will say, I forgive you. And even if it's the senior monk who is behaving improperly towards the junior monk, he doesn't bow down, but he'll join the hands in Anjali and say, I realize that I've done something wrong to you, please forgive me. And there's this common practice now in the monastic life when a monk is taking leave, say, of other monks, he'll say, let me see if I could remember the formula, O Kasavandami Bhante. Dvara, O Kasavandami Bhante, Dvara Tena Aparadang Kamatu Me Bhante Anukampang Upadaya. So we say, I'm taking leave of you, Venerable. Please forgive me for any faults I might have committed through the three doors, Dvara Tayena, by way of body, by way of speech, or by way of thought. And then the senior monk, or the other monks will say, Kamami Kamitabang, I pardon whatever can be pardoned. Yes, so there is that practice. And then if there's a dispute, say, between two parties, either two individuals or two groups, and there's no easy way to resolve, to determine who is right, who is wrong, but they want to become reconciled, then there's a process of reconciliation whereby one monastic from the two factions, the one who's considered the most reasonable, will say, well, we have been involved in this dispute, and in the course of this dispute, we might have committed some transgressions against you. Please pardon us for our transgressions. And then a representative from the other group will make the same request, and that way they sort of settle the difference between them.
So much, Bhante.
Okay, I see. I called Belinda here in the front.
Oh,
Okay, go in the back, and then we'll come to Belinda.
your turn.
Okay, and your name was?
Andy?
Oh, you are Andy, that's right.
Yeah.
So you're Andrew and you're Andy. Okay, please.
What would you say if like someone acts angry or like contentious or difficult to correct because they've been taken advantage of in the past, like bullied before, so they act angry to compensate so they don't get to take advantage of again? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I'm not quite catching. Maybe hold the mic a little closer.
Is that better?
Yeah.
So if someone has been like mistreated in the past,
Yeah.
and they act angry and aggressive because they're that, just so they don't get mistreated again, what would you say about that?
Of course, the way you respond depends on your relationship to the person. If it's a person that you don't know well, then you just have to try to respond either by directing compassion towards that person or by applying equanimity, just not letting the person's rough behavior ruffle your own feathers, so to speak. But if it's a person that you know well, that you have some personal direct relationship with, then you can speak to them. This is where you take them aside at the appropriate time and point out their faults and suggest the need for them to correct their behavior.
So by doing that, so if you feel like you've been like mistreated before because you act angry or stubborn to make yourself less easy to be so you can be mistreated less easily, would you like, hey, that doesn't sound very easy to let go, right? It's a vicious cycle. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure, you're saying that this will become a vicious cycle?
Yeah, if you feel mistreated before and then you act more aggressive to compensate for that,
Yeah.
but then it alienates you, but then you don't want to get taken advantage of again, don't want to get mistreated again. What's the solution to letting go of being mistreated at the same time the fear of being mistreated again?
I don't know. Okay, let me see if I understand the situation. You say that you've been mistreated,
In the past, yeah.
and then you're afraid of being mistreated again,
Right,
and so you act aggressively?
right.
Yeah, if you have then a good friend and somebody who wants to help you, you could sort of say you are the good friend, then you will sit down with that person and let that person speak about how they've been mistreated in the past and sort of get it out of their minds. And maybe you have to convince them, let go of the past, don't cling to the past. Now you have an opportunity, especially if they've encountered testing one, okay. Okay, so you sit down with them and you try to convince them, let go of the past. You shouldn't let your past experiences dominate your mind and govern your behavior in the present. And instead, you should recognize that when you behave in this way, you're just alienating other people, you're becoming more isolated, more lonely, you're not able to get along with other people, you're not able to act in harmony with others, and it just creates more misery for yourself. And so you try to encourage them to develop good and wholesome qualities. Yeah, that's the way I would handle a situation like that. And point out the benefits of developing these good qualities of being patient with others, trying to get along in harmony with others, and that will bring they'll win friends and become accepted by others and treated kindly by others. When you act aggressively towards others, and others will either ignore you, reject you, or act aggressively towards you. When you act in friendly ways towards others, then others will respond with friendly ways towards you. And that will make you happy.
Okay, thanks.
That is the way I would handle that. Okay, I said that we should give Belinda, who is in the front here.
Thank you, Bhante. How would you read or interpret the passage on the bandits with the two-handed saw?
The what?
The bandit with the two-handed saw.
Yeah.
How do you read or interpret that passage? Like how would you, what's your take on that?
Whether I would be able to behave like that.
But also just like having quite challenging
what I would say, probably if bandits were to start carving me up limb by limb, I might not have so much resentment towards them. But if other people sort of disparage me and say, you know, your translation is wrong. Well, so-and-so's translation is much better than yours. Your essay is wrong argument. Then I get angry. Yeah, that would be what I would find challenging. So how to deal with that? Yeah, that's where it requires patience and maybe a willingness, you know, to like recognize somebody says, okay, your translation is wrong. Okay, then I say like, okay, what is, the natural tendency of the mind is to become defensive. No, I'm right. But then, as my teacher, my first teacher taught me long ago, the objective is not for you to be right and for others to be wrong, but to find out what is the fact, what is the truth. And then so I would consider, well, is his criticism right? And if it's right, then I would try to accept it.
Is the Buddha speaking to, I guess, the stain on the karmic stream in any amount of unwholesome, I guess, emotion, even in the face of pretty terrible conditions?
Say again, I'm not quite sure.
I guess I'm trying to understand. I guess what I'm reading that sutta to mean is that it doesn't matter the conditions for which unwholesome emotions arise. The fact that, I guess, they happen are still a mark in your karmic stream. That's sort of how I interpret it.
The fact that they are still
the fact that unwholesomeness arises, it's still a mark in your karmic stream. It still matters, even independent of conditions, even if there might be really reasonable grounds.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. Sort of difficult conditions, say oppressive, afflictive conditions, under those conditions, like unwholesome responses can arise more easily than when everything is going smoothly. Is that the point you're trying to make?
And yet, I think the Buddha is speaking to the fact that that's still, it doesn't matter what the conditions are, even if they are difficult, the unwholesome kind of emotions or volitions are still in your karmic stream, that they still kind of stand, they still are harmful against yourself, even if there's really reasonable grounds for them to arise.
Yeah.
Is that what he's trying to teach in this
Yeah,
sutta?
well, basically, the point is stated very, very simply and directly, that even when one is provoked, he starts off with speech, with words that are aggressive, hateful, antagonistic, that you should not give rise to an angry response and then one should not give rise to anger and resentment in your own mind and should not respond with hostile words, with aggressive words. So start by controlling the mind, and when you control the mind, then it ensures that the speech will not be abrasive and hostile. So basically the point is to maintain one's patience even under the most provocative conditions.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe we could take one more question, and I think it becomes time for the break. Let's just see. Oh no, we go from 9 to 10, yeah, so we could take a few more questions.
Monday online.
Oh, so many online, yeah. I'm so sorry, I have to apologize to the people online. Like on Saturdays, I'm primarily focused online, but now we have a large group in the meditation hall, so I tend to overlook the people online. So we have, first is Hong Chu, and then you unmute.
Yes, Yobante. Good morning.
Okay, good morning. Let me get this earphone in. Okay, go ahead.
Generally speaking, how we can practice the Mangala Sutta in everyday life as a lay person.
I think that's what I've been trying to explain for the last 2.5 days. And if you've been following, I've given many, many practical points. And then if you've registered, then you'll be getting the file, so you'll see many points that you could read on your own, many advice from the Buddha that you could read on your own on how to apply the Mangala Sutta in your everyday life. And you just pick up the points that you find to be most relevant. You know, don't try to cover everything at once, but pick up a few points that you find especially applicable, put them into practice, and then you can work to pick up and develop other aspects mentioned in the Mangala Sutta. Okay, let us go on. I gave Susie a chance to ask a question yesterday, so let me give a chance to some people who haven't had a chance. So Raki Kayam.
Yes. Bante, if a son carries a resentment towards his mother because of unwholesome actions she has taken in the past,
Yeah.
and now son is adopting a practice to ignore her and he does not want to be associated with her anymore, is it the right way to, uh, is it the right practice at the part of the son? But now mother wants to have a connection with the son, but her actions are not uh, are same.
Her actions are the same, you say?
Yes.
She's still sort of aggressive and abusive.
She's not aggressive, but um, she's not, well, she was aggressive at the past, plus her actions were not uh, motherly before.
Yeah.
She is not aggressive now, but her actions are still not motherly, and she is adopting uh, unacceptable actions still.
Yeah, of course, ideally, the son should find some way to reconcile with the mother, or at least to look after the mother in whatever way is possible. But sometimes that can be very difficult. And I really don't know how to give sort of general advice under circumstances like that.
But is it okay that if he is ignoring her mother altogether?
I think it's not so good to ignore the mother altogether. He should try to the best of his ability to maybe to benefit his mother, to treat her with kindness. Maybe he has to keep, if the relationship is very harmful and abusive, maybe keep some distance, but from time to time he should find a chance to try to change the mother's attitude, maybe at least send her birthday cards or visit on the birthday, send flowers on the birthday, do something to soften the mother's attitude.
Okay. Thank you, Bante.
Okay, we'll go to David Chung.
Thank you very much, Bante, on two accounts. I really appreciate the time. I visited you very briefly last fall at the monastery. Thank you very much, and especially for this Q&A session. I really enjoy your advice and teachings. My questions are, does the Mangala teaching or otherwise have any advice on handling repentance?
Advice on repentance?
Repentance, yeah. Because in hindsight, I may have realized that I didn't handle that situation or some conflict too well. So what's the teaching or advice on handling repentance? And maybe tomorrow you can talk a bit more about, is there such thing as a meditation burnout. Thank you very much again.
Okay. Yeah, repentance is not specifically mentioned within the Mangala Sutta, but in a way this ties up with what I said earlier about forgiveness, that when you've realized that you have transgressed in some way against another person, mistreated them, sort of violated certain codes of conduct with relation to them, then the appropriate way is to go to them and apologize and ask for their understanding and forgiveness, and their proper response would be to forgive you for your wrongdoing. Yeah, so that is, we find incidents like that elsewhere in the Buddha's teaching, though it's not included in the Mangala Sutta. And then about meditation burnout, yeah, definitely there is such a thing. And so what I always suggest is to people to maintain a healthy balance in their life. There's a tendency, as I mentioned when we started this retreat, for people in the West to think to really practice Buddhism, you just practice meditation. But I always like to emphasize a balance between meditation practice, then study to learn the Dhamma and understand the Dhamma, and then to use devotional practices as well in order to enrich the inner life of faith and devotion, which uplifts the mind, and also to perform acts of service, any kind of philanthropic activity which will be of benefit to others. So in this way you have a kind of balanced spiritual life, not just thinking, I have to sit for 12, 14 hours a day, which many people do, and then they get burnt out. Okay, maybe one more question, then we'll take our break, and we'll go all the ways to the UK with Madeline.
Thank you, Bhante. My question is about anger, dealing with anger and patience. I live in a block of flats where there's been a huge amount of anger about various processes that have been going on in the management company. And there's been a lot of bad language, rows and so on. I send metta to my neighbors.
Yeah.
I try to understand how they have become this way by sending compassion to them. But I was really interested to see that one of the things the Mangala Sutta suggests is just to pay no attention to them. And I'm wondering, it never occurred to me, but I think that, is that just not being unfriendly? It's okay to just think, I'm not going to pay attention to those people anymore, but continue to send metta and wish them well. Balancing.
Well, what I would say is that it depends on what you mean by paying no attention. If you pass them in the building or out on the street, you shouldn't completely ignore them. You can greet them, say hello, how are you? Maybe engage in a little casual chit-chat with them. And that is part of the process of maybe resolving differences and sort of melting anger or hostility is by engaging in simple, friendly chit-chat. Yeah, so don't completely ignore them. If you find that it will be helpful to engage with them in just casual, friendly ways.
Yeah.
But if they respond just with hostility and with anger towards you, then you just have to ignore them. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think I'm feel inside myself. I feel inclined to be friendly, but when I saw this, just ignore them. It's the balance thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, the balance.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so now it's time for us to take a little break. So I think we have from, yeah, so we have 10 to 10:20, we can have a little break. And if you really want, if you sort of, the mind is getting a bit tight from the meditation and the teachings, what you can do, you could just take a nice little walk down. You could do it within 15 minutes, down this Bodhi path with these statues of the Arhats, down around near the lake, and then come back up. You'll find it refreshing, invigorating, probably more so than a cup of tea.
I'd like to offer making tea for you for the next session.
I actually have a cup of tea here.
Okay.
I'm just going to put some hot water in it.
Okay. Maybe
Thank you, very kind.
Can I ask a question on the taking of the refuges and resets?
Yeah.
I guess, is it possible